So today I'm going to talk about the mother's work and way. And in this presentation, we'll look at some of the work that the mother did for humanity during her life, as well as the way of living that she set as an example for us. Of course, her main work, done in conjunction with Sri Aurobindo, was to bring down the supramental consciousness onto the earth so that life here could be divinized. This she accomplished on the 29th February 1956, a day that she designated as the Lord's Day, perhaps in a gesture of humility and credit to Sri Aurobindo. But she continued the work of establishing this new consciousness more firmly into matter and into her own body for the next 17 years, clearing the way for its easier and earlier manifestation in human beings and in the earth life. But in addition to this inner work, she had an active outer life and outer work, building up and running the ashram, establishing Auroville, writing and speaking about her work and way of life, and personally assisting, one can even say mothering, countless individuals in their life and sadhana. There is no doubt much more that she did inwardly and outwardly, but we'll briefly focus on these outstanding aspects of the mother's life, with an eye on how we may, in our own way, emulate her living and inspiring example. We should perhaps begin by noting that the mother was not an ordinary human being, but an incarnation of the Divine Mother, the consciousness and force of the Supreme, the divine conscious force that dominates all existence, as Sri Aurobindo describes her in the book, The Mother. That book, especially chapter 6, succinctly describes the greater spiritual dimensions of the mother's existence, which we only note in passing here. It says that there are three fundamental poises of the mother: transcendent, universal, and individual. And as an individual, she embodies the power of these two vaster ways of her existence and makes them living and near to us, and mediates between the human personality and the divine nature. In the letters on the mother that follow the book, The Mother, in the same volume of the complete works, Sri Aurobindo specifically indicates that these greater dimensions were embodied by the mother of the ashram. In noting that the mother was an avatar, we do not mean to say that she was not human or did not have a human side. In Sri Aurobindo's letters on avatarhood, he says that there are two sides of the phenomenon of avatarhood: the divine consciousness behind and the instrumental personality. The divine consciousness is omnipotent, but it has put forth the instrumental personality in nature under the conditions of nature and uses it according to the rules of the game. He also says the avatar is not supposed to act in a non-human way. He takes up human action and uses human methods with the human consciousness in front and the divine behind. If he did not, his taking a human body would have no meaning and would be of no use to anybody. He could just as well have stayed above and done things from there. And speaking specifically about the mother, he says, the divine puts on an appearance of humanity, assumes the outward human nature in order to tread the path and show it to human beings, but does not cease to be divine. It is a manifestation that takes place, a manifestation of a growing divine consciousness, not human turning into divine. The mother was inwardly above the human even in childhood, so the view held by many is erroneous. I have stressed the word inwardly in this last sentence. Inwardly, she was the divine, but outwardly, she was human and also had to tread the path so that she could show it to us. He also notes that human beings too are the divine within. Specifically, he says, the divine is there in the human, and the human fulfilling and exceeding its highest aspirations and tendencies becomes the divine. And then he adds that the avatar becomes human in order to show humanity how to become divine. All of this is to explain the perspective with which we can look at the mother's life and work as an inspiration and as an example for us to follow. Sri Aurobindo puts it, if avatarhood is only a flashing miracle, then I have no use for it. The manifestation of the supramental consciousness on earth was the primary mission of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. We can cite extracts from a few letters of Sri Aurobindo to his disciples that strongly suggest this. In the first, he says, what we are doing, if and when we succeed, will be a beginning, not a completion. It is the foundation of a new consciousness on earth, a consciousness with infinite possibilities of manifestation. It is not intended to supramentalize humanity at large, but to establish the principle of the supramental consciousness in earth evolution. If that is done, all that is needed will be evolved by the supramental power itself. It is not, therefore, important that the mission should be widespread. What is important is that the thing should be done at all, in however small a number. That is the only difficulty. And the second letter pertains to the mother's embodiment in a physical form on earth. It is a chance for the earth consciousness to receive the supramental into it and to undergo first the transformation necessary for that to be possible. Afterwards, there will be a farther transformation by the supramental. But the whole earth consciousness will not be supramentalized. There will be first a new race representing the supermind, as man represents the mind. And finally, a quote which suggests this work as the primary mission of the mother. The mother comes in order to bring down the supramental, and it is the descent which makes her full manifestation here possible. We understand from the mother's statements that this mission of bringing down the supramental consciousness into the earth nature was achieved on 29 February 1956 during the Wednesday evening meditation in the ashram playground. There and then she had an inner experience which she described as follows. This evening, the divine presence, concrete and material, was there present amongst you. I had a form of living gold, bigger than the universe, and I was facing a huge and massive golden door which separated the world from the divine. As I looked at the door, I knew and willed, in a single movement of consciousness, that the time has come. And lifting with both hands a mighty golden hammer, I struck one blow, one single blow on the door, and the door was shattered to pieces. Then the supramental light and force and consciousness rushed down upon earth in an uninterrupted flow. And regarding this event, she wrote the following message: Lord, thou hast willed, and I execute. A new light breaks upon the earth. A new world is born. The things that were promised are fulfilled. So we've already indicated that the fulfillment of this mission represented a beginning, not a completion of the manifestation of the supramental consciousness on earth. The Mother and Sri Aurobindo first established this consciousness in themselves, and being incarnate in a human body and holding in their cosmic consciousness the whole of earth, its transforming influence would naturally spread. And when I say in themselves, we should distinguish between the different layers of their being: higher spiritual consciousness, mind, life, and the body. To establish the supermind securely in the earth atmosphere, it was necessary to establish it in their physical bodies. Before then, there could be an influence of the supermind working in the higher parts of the being, but not its full presence and transformation. It appears that when Sri Aurobindo left his body in December 1950, he brought down a first descent of the supramental consciousness into his body, which remained intact for more than 4 days and had a supramental golden light around it, which was visible to some of the sadhaks. The Mother indicated that as soon as he left his body, all this supramental force which was in him passed from his body into mine, and I felt the friction of the passage. In another place, she noted that as soon as Sri Aurobindo withdrew from his body, what he has called the mind of light got realized in me. She explained that the mind of light was the reception of the supramental consciousness into the physical mind and was a necessary precursor to its manifestation in the physical itself. After Sri Aurobindo's passing, the Mother's inner work seemed to be focused on the transformation of the consciousness of her body, its penetration by the supramental light and force. For example, in April 1951, she said, "Now it has become the very movement of the cellular consciousness. All weaknesses, all responses to adverse suggestions, I mean the smallest things of every minute in the cells, are taken in the same movement of offering. And these come sometimes in waves to such an extent that the body feels it will swoon before this assault. And then comes a light, so warm, so deep, so powerful, which puts everything back in order, in its place, and opens the way to transformation." She continued working on this level in the years that followed, occasionally commenting on her progress. In 1954, she wrote, "In this intensity, the aspiration grows formidable, and in answer to it, thy presence becomes evident in the cells themselves, giving to the body the appearance of a multicolored kaleidoscope in which innumerable luminous particles in constant motion are sovereignly reorganized by an invisible and all-powerful hand, Her work in the cells of the body was tenably a factor leading to the descent of the supramental consciousness in the Earth atmosphere on 29 February 1956. Following that descent, she indicated that the transformative process had accelerated and there was a change in the Earth atmosphere. Her work proceeded towards the establishment of what Sri Aurobindo and the mother called the Superman, which is an intermediate being between the human and a completely new species of being, the supramental being, which would not be born in the normal animal-human process. This Superman, this intermediate being, would be human in origin, but have a supramental consciousness and essentially a divine life. The mother established this consciousness in herself and brought it down in a more general way to be accessible to others. Regarding this, without directly identifying herself as the first exemplar, she said on 16 April 1958, "We have the proof that in certain conditions, the ordinary state of humanity can be exceeded, and a new state of consciousness worked out which enables at least a conscious relation between mental and supramental man. It can be asserted with certainty that there will be an intermediate specimen between the mental and the supramental being, a kind of Superman who will still have the qualities and in part the nature of man, that is, who will still belong in his most external form to the human being with its animal origin, but will transform his consciousness sufficiently to belong in his realization and activity to a new race, a race of supermen. This species may be considered a transitional species, for one can foresee that it will discover the means of producing new beings without going through the old animal method. And these beings, who will have a truly spiritual birth, will constitute the elements of the new race, the supramental race. It seems, it is even certain, that the very substance which will constitute this intermediate world that is already being built up is richer, more powerful, more luminous, more resistant, with a certain subtler, more penetrating qualities and a kind of innate capacity of universality, as if its degree of subtlety and refinement allowed the perception of vibrations in a much wider, if not altogether total way. And it removes the sensation of division one has with the old substance, the ordinary mental substance. One may conclude from this that the moment a body, which was of course formed by the old animal method, is capable of living this consciousness naturally and spontaneously, without effort, without going out of itself, it proves that this is not one single exceptional case, but simply the forerunner of a realization which, even if it is not altogether general, can at least be shared by a certain number of individuals, who besides, as soon as they share it, will lose the perception of being separate individuals and become a living collectivity. Then, on the 1st of January 1969, there was a descent of a powerful new consciousness, which the mother later identified as the Superman consciousness. We may suppose that this descent represented a more general manifestation of this consciousness into the earth consciousness, as opposed to the more individual realization that she had attained already in 1958. On January 4th of 1969, the mother explained, It was something very material. I mean, it was very external, and it was luminous with a golden light. It was very strong, very powerful, but even so, its character was a smiling benevolence, a peaceful delight, and a kind of opening out into delight and light. My own impression was that of an immense personality. Immense, that is to say, for it the earth was small like this. She makes a gesture as though holding a small ball in her palm. Like a ball, an immense personality, very, very benevolent, which came for, Mother seems to lift this ball gently from the hollow of her hands. It gave the impression of a personal divinity, and yet it was, I do not know, who comes to help. And so strong, and at the same time so gentle, so all-embracing. The Mother indicated that this consciousness was acting on a large scale and that it was also working in others, only that they, not being accustomed to observing themselves, would notice it less, though its action would be essentially the same. She indicated that there had been marked changes in those individuals who had been touched by its descent on the 1st of January. On 12th March 1969, she told a disciple that it has come to materialize, that it was looking for instruments, and then added that she had great hope in the little children. Later in 1971, she mentioned, "I believe really that it is among the children that will be found those who can begin the new race. Men are crusted over." So this is a brief sketch of the Mother's primary inner work of establishing the supramental consciousness in the Earth atmosphere, so that it could work out here its manifestation over time. She realized this supramental consciousness within her own body consciousness and thereby became the forerunner of a new intermediate species of the Superman. This Superman consciousness, however, was not limited to the Mother's individual being. It descended in a general way as a permanent presence in the Earth atmosphere, seeking and uplifting and assisting other human beings to embody this new divine consciousness. She said that for those who opened themselves to the new consciousness, that even now they could undergo the supramental change. It is no more something for the future. It is attainable even now by individuals who fulfill the necessary conditions of absolute surrender, while it is also a benevolent and powerful presence assisting individuals in this surrender and guiding and changing them little by little. While the Mother was carrying on this inner work, and it was a formidable work made against an immense resistance of inconscient material nature and formidable hostile and anti-divine cosmic forces, she was also heavily engaged in outer work as well. Most prominently in this regard, she developed the Sri Aurobindo Ashram and acted as its general manager. When she first arrived in Pondicherry and met Sri Aurobindo in 1914, she, her husband Paul Richard, and Sri Aurobindo launched the philosophical journal Arya, in which Sri Aurobindo would first publish his major works. The journal was financed by the Mother, and she was the chief executive. There was also a French edition in which she translated Sri Aurobindo's articles into French. When World War I broke out and the mother and her husband had to leave, Sri Aurobindo took over most of the writing. They returned in April 1920, but Paul Richard soon left and the mother stayed on with Sri Aurobindo. She managed Sri Aurobindo's household and also organized the small group of disciples who had gathered round him, as well as the stream of other disciples who began arriving. On 24th November 1926, Sri Aurobindo achieved a decisive spiritual realization, retired to his rooms, and put the mother in sole charge of the community of disciples, both their outer living arrangements and the guidance of their sadhana, though with his support from behind. We get a sense of the work involved in developing and managing the ashram from this letter she wrote to her son Andre on 23rd August 1930. The ashram is becoming a more and more interesting institution. We have acquired our 21st house. The number of paid workers of the ashram, laborers and servants, has reached 60 or 65. And the number of ashram members, Sri Aurobindo's disciples living in Pondicherry, varies between 85 and 100. 5 cars, 12 bicycles, 4 sewing machines, a dozen typewriters, many garages, an automobile repair workshop, an electrical service, a building service, sewing departments, a library and a reading room containing several thousand volumes, a photographic service, and general stores containing a wide variety of goods, nearly all imported from France, large gardens for flowers, vegetables, and fruits, a dairy, a bakery, etc., etc. You can see that this is no small affair. And as I am taking care of all of this, I can truly say that I am busy. The number of ashram members continued to increase to 140 in 1936 and to 350 in 1942. Properties had to be acquired, renovated, or built for their housing, and their needs had to be met largely through the organization and industry of the ashram members themselves. This dynamic aspect of the ashram was consistent with the nature of their spiritual practice, which aimed not at a withdrawal from life activities, but a reception into all its facets of a growing spiritual consciousness and force. This practical arrangement was also necessary to limit the growing expenses of the ashram that would not otherwise have been balanced by donations. In addition, some disciples who knew particular arts or crafts or had other practical skills were encouraged to develop them, and these sometimes grew into cottage industries and departments of the ashram. Over time, departments were established for dairy farms, a bakery, food preparation, clothing production, furniture production, making of stainless steel products for cooking and eating vessels and utensils, a printing press, and other units. The mother not only met the ashramites several times a day in the central ashram building, but she also went to see them from time to time in their rooms, and also regularly visited the departments and looked at any work that was in progress. And while capable department heads were appointed for each of the departments, she consulted with them frequently, advised them, and answered their questions, and was the final authority in charge of all. At one point, Sri Aurobindo described mother's activities as follows. The mother's whole day, from early morning and a large part of the night, also has always been devoted to occupations connected with the sadhana, not her own, but that of the sadhaks. Pranam, blessings, meditation, and receiving the sadhaks on the staircase and elsewhere, sometimes for 2 hours at a time, and listening to what they have to say, questions about sadhana, results of their work or their matters, complaints, disputes, quarrels, all kinds of conferences about this or that to be decided and done. There is no end to the list. For the rest, she had to attend to their letters, to reports about the material work of the ashram in all its many departments, correspondence, and all sorts of things connected with the contacts with the outside world, including often serious trouble and difficulties, and the settlement of matters of great importance. In taking up the charge of the disciples' inner spiritual work, the mother took upon herself their difficulties in transformation, which could take a toll on her body and health. A striking example of this that took place in 1931 is recounted in von Vreckham's biography. From 18 October to 24 November, she had to withdraw and all of her activities suspended. On the latter date, she wrote the last but one of her prayers and meditations, which she rarely wrote at that time. O my Lord, my sweet Master, for the accomplishment of thy work I have sunk down into the unfathomable depths of matter, it went. I have touched with my finger the horror of the falsehood and the inconscience. I have reached the seat of oblivion and a supreme obscurity. I know we are unworthy. I know the world is not ready. But I cry to thee with an absolute faith in thy grace, and I know that thy grace will save. Sri Aurobindo wrote with concern to Narodbaran on this subject. The mother has had a very severe attack, and she must absolutely husband her forces in view of the strain the 24 November Darshan Day will mean for her. It is quite out of the question for her to begin seeing everybody and receiving them meanwhile. A single morning of that kind of thing would exhaust her altogether. You must remember that for her, a physical contact of this kind with others is not a mere social or domestic meeting with a few superficial movements which make no difference one way or the other. It means for her an interchange, a pouring out of her forces, and a receiving of things good, bad, and mixed from them, which often involves a great labor of adjustment and elimination, and in many cases, though not in all, a severe strain on the body. A week later, he wrote again to Narodbaran, I have not yet said anything about the mother's illness because to do so would have needed a long consideration of what those who are at the center of a work like this have to be, what they have to take upon themselves of human or terrestrial nature and its limitations, and how much they have to bear of the difficulties of transformation. At the same time, many months later, he clarified some of this. The mother, by the very nature of her work, had to identify herself with the sadhaks, to support all their difficulties, to receive into herself all the poison in their nature, to take up besides all the difficulties of the universal earth nature, including the possibility of death and disease, in order to fight them out. As Sri Aurobindo alludes to here, the mother not only took on herself and cleared the difficulties of the sadhaks, but also the difficulties of the universal earth nature. Arrayed against Sri Aurobindo's and the mother's work of bringing down the supramental consciousness were immense and powerful cosmic forces that had up until now held the earth under their reign in a state of ignorance, falsehood, suffering, and death. These forces now arose in a fury at the possibility of losing their control. This was the occult significance of the Second World War, and it is necessary to briefly comment on the mother's inner occult work in securing the victory of the Allied forces. In a letter to her son Andrei in October 1938, the mother said, "Hitler is a choice instrument for these anti-divine forces, which want violence, upheavals, and war. For they know that these things delay and hinder the action of the divine forces." And Sri Aurobindo wrote, "The victory of one side, the Allies, would keep the path open for the evolutionary forces. The victory of the other side would drag back humanity, degrade it horribly, and might lead even at its worst to its eventual failure as a race. As others in the past, evolution failed and perished." Sri Aurobindo and the mother kept regularly informed of all the details of the war through newspapers and the radio, and they actively intervened in its progress with their occult power. Among the most critical instances mentioned by Sri Aurobindo or the mother and recounted by von Wreckham are the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk across the English Channel, assisted by a fog that enshrouded Dunkirk, as well as the German airfields in the region. The invasion of Russia by Germany, which ultimately led to Germany's defeat, which was initiated by an occult appearance of the mother before Hitler, in which she assumed the form of his Asuric guide, advising him to invade. And the halting and reversal of the Japanese invasion of India by a heavy downpour of unseasonably early monsoon rains, which bogged down the invading army in the mud and flood of the jungle from which they had to beat an ignominious retreat. Sri Aurobindo called the war the Mother's War. And the war ended when the Japanese Emperor Hirohito, addressing the nation directly for the first time in history, broadcast on 15th August 1945 a message declaring the unconditional capitulation of his country. That is, on Sri Aurobindo's birthday. It was during the war that the mother started the ashram school on December 2nd, 1943, for about 20 children. The threatening presence of the Japanese troops on India's border and a few minor bombardments had frightened the population. And some who had relatives in the ashram sought refuge there, bringing with them their children. The mother said, when they arrived here with a throng of small children and asked if we could give them shelter, we could not send them back, could we? But it nevertheless meant a significant change for the ashram, which had been up to then quite disciplined and single-pointedly oriented towards a divine life. It meant an expansion of the ashram life, a broadening of the yoga. As she said later, it has an advantage. We were too much on the outside of life. There were many problems which did not occur in the former ashram, which, if one wanted to manifest oneself fully, would suddenly have cropped up. We have taken on the problems of an all-round communal life a little too early, but it was necessary to tackle them. This way one learns a lot of things. One overcomes a lot of difficulties. The mother organized the school, took classes with the students, and consulted with both teachers and students. The numbers of students increased in the months and years that followed. In addition to providing for academic studies, the mother established a rigorous physical education program for the development of the body, which was to be treated as an instrument of the divine and therefore raised to its highest pinnacle of health and fitness. Facilities were purchased and developed, including a dirty tract of wasteland along the seashore that was transformed into a beautiful sports ground. Boys and girls alike participated in a full regimen of exercises, drills, games, and athletic activities such as gymnastics, wrestling, track and field, tennis, swimming, hatha yoga, and martial arts. The disciples of the ashram, young and old, were also encouraged to participate in the physical education program, and many of them did. The mother herself took up a daily game of tennis in the evenings for about an hour with the younger people by turns. At this time, she was in her early 70s. She also took part in tournaments, carefully observing various athletic competitions and drills. She also became involved in various cultural events, and in particular, productions of dramatic plays involving students and ashramites as actors and actresses, especially plays that had been written by Sri Aurobindo. Iyengar, in his biography of the mother, called On the Mother, writes, "The mother took a great deal of interest in dramatic coaching and often discussed her plans with Sri Aurobindo. She chose the play or the theme, assigned the roles to the various participants, and personally supervised the progress of their acting. I have been told," writes Narod Baran, "what minute care she took to correct the movements, articulations of each actor, and how she did not spare anyone. Thanks to her assiduous personal training and attention, our novices learned the art of acting with beauty and refinement." After Sri Aurobindo's passing in December 1950, following a 12-day period of meditative silence, the mother resumed her visits to the playground and her classes there. She admonished the distraught sadhaks To grieve is an insult to Sri Aurobindo, who is here with us, conscious and alive. And later added, it is left to us to realize his work with all the sincerity, eagerness, and concentration necessary. She had classes for young students as well as for older children and advanced students. A significant development during this period was her classes with the advanced students, in which quite a few sadhaks also attended, in which there were readings from various texts and questions and answers. As Iyengar notes, these classes were to become a wonderful instrument for the communication of information, knowledge, occult wisdom, and divine illumination, all in an atmosphere of peace, informality, and motherly love divine. These classes continued during the school seasons from December 1950 through 1958. They offer rare insights into innumerable topics in a way that is understandable to older school children, and especially provide practical guidelines for growing spiritually. Recordings of the classes were transcribed and form 6 of the 17 volumes of the collected works of the Mother. Another important volume titled On Education includes her articles, messages, letters, and conversations related to education, and covers both theoretical aims and practical guidance for educators in general and for the ashram school in particular. Another noteworthy development during this period was the expansion of the school to the college level with the inauguration of the International University Center on 6 January 1952, and it's open to international students. Iyengar gives us a glimpse into the Mother's work for the school in her last years. He says, while the Mother was thus fighting the bittersweet battle of change and transformation, she was also keeping in close touch with the ashram departments, as well as the developments in Auroville. The Center of Education, with its over 600 pupils and 150 teachers, was quite at the heart of the ashram, and the Mother was always ready to find time to discuss its problems. Her answers to a monitress on the problems of management of the children and of their holidays appeared in the February 1970 issue of the Bulletin, and precisely helpful in the given situations, the answers had a general application also. As regards the purpose of education at the center, the Mother thought that the main thrust should be on transformation. She said, what we want to teach is a new idea of life and a realization of consciousness. This realization is new to all, and the only way to teach others is to live according to this new consciousness oneself, and to allow oneself to be transformed by it. There is no better lesson than that of an example. Someone who sincerely aspires to act in accordance with the supreme truth creates a kind of contagion for the people around him. And of course, each one was unique and had his own way of changing. It would therefore be unwise to attempt regimentation in a matter so personal as the individual's dynamic of self-transformation. The formal inauguration of Auroville took place on 28 February 1968, a week after the Mother's 90th birthday, and a day before the anniversary of the supramental manifestation on earth. Von Vreckum writes that, in fact, The concept of the ideal city seems to have been a part of the mother's work throughout her yoga of evolution in many lives, and a necessary condition or means to found or fix the divine life upon earth. He explains that earlier attempts to build the city were the sun city of Akatetan, some 3.5 millennia ago, by the pharaoh Ekhenaten, under the impulse of his mother, Queen Tai, who was an incarnation of the Divine Mother. And a second by Tommaso Campanella, a defrocked Dominion monk and practicing magician, who wrote a book in or around 1602 called Città del Sol, City of the Sun, which described a city closely resembling Auroville. Van Vreckum cites Francis Yates, who wrote that the city of the sun was to be built on a hill in the midst of a vast plain. In the center and on the summit of the hill, there was a vast temple of marvelous construction. It was perfectly round, and its great dome was supported on huge columns. And according to Gareth Knight, Campanella hoped to establish his city of earth as a herald of a new age. The fourfold theme was again dominant. 4 main roads led to the center, where there was a circular dome temple. All property would be held in common. Campanella, however, was tortured and imprisoned during the Inquisition and unable to build the city. According to Van Vreckum, the physical decision to launch Auroville was taken at the end of 1964 during the World Conference of the Sri Aurobindo Society, an international organization which the mother had started in 1960 and of which she was the president. In September 1965, the mother wrote, "Auroville wants to be a universal town where men and women of all countries are able to live in peace and progressive harmony, above all creeds, all politics, and all nationalities. The purpose of Auroville is human unity." And in 1969, shortly after the founding of Auroville, the mother stated, "The task of giving a concrete form to Sri Aurobindo's vision was entrusted to the mother. The creation of a new world, a new humanity, a new society, expressing and embodying the new consciousness is the work she has undertaken. By the very nature of things, it is a collective ideal that calls for a collective effort, so that it may be realized in the terms of an integral human perfection. The ashram, founded and built by the mother, was the first step towards the accomplishment of this goal. The project of Auroville is the next step, more exterior, which seeks to widen the base of this attempt to establish harmony between soul and body, spirit and nature, heaven and earth, in the collective life of mankind. Between 1965 and 1973, the mother worked with an architect, Roger Anger, on the plans for the physical structure of the city and gave numerous messages regarding its proposed social structure. We may note a few of these from volume 13 of her collected works. Money would no longer be the sovereign lord. Individual work would have a far greater importance than that of material wealth and social standing. There, work would not be a way to earn one's living, but a way to express oneself and to develop one's capacities and possibilities while being of service to the community as a whole, which for its part would provide for each individual's subsistence and sphere of action. Another quote, "Organization is a discipline of action. But for Auroville, we aspire to go beyond arbitrary and artificial organization. We want an organization which is the expression of a higher consciousness working to manifest the truth of the future." And in answer to a question, what political organization do you want for Auroville? The mother said, "An amusing definition occurs to me. A divine anarchy. But the world will not understand. Men must become conscious of their psychic being and organize themselves spontaneously without fixed rules and laws. That is the ideal. For this, one must be in contact with one's psychic being. One must be guided by it, and the ego's authority and influence must disappear." And there is this statement made in 1972. "Auroville has been created for a superhumanity, for those who want to surmount their ego and renounce all desire, to prepare themselves for receiving the supermind. They alone are true Aurovillians." I wanted to say something about the mother's way of dealing with people because this is inspiring and more in the scope of our ability to emulate. There are many accounts by various disciples of her care and attention to their smallest needs and concerns, even while she herself was under the tremendous pressures of the immense spiritual and practical work. In this motherly care, the person's spiritual growth was her primary concern, and she showed by example, but also by practical suggestions, how to effect that growth, and yet with an acute sensitivity to the person's present state of development and need. We can find this personal attention and sensitivity expressed sometimes in the classes recorded in the volumes of questions and answers in her collected works, as well as in her conversations with Sat Prem, which were recorded during the latter years of her life in the 13 volumes of Mother's Agenda. We find it verified in the many memoirs which have been written or recounted by various disciples of their relations with the Mother. In this regard, I would mention the 5 volumes of How They Came to Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, written by my late friend Sham Kumari, which relate the stories of 149 disciples' interactions with Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. What is perhaps even more essential to say about the Mother's way, however, is her absolute self-giving, which is evident everywhere in her work described above, as well as in her personal interactions. We saw it expressed by Sri Aurobindo when the Mother had to withdraw for some time to regain her strength from the exchange of forces with the disciples in which she had imbibed all the poisons and difficulties of their nature. He also described the patient attention and care she gave to the disciples who came to her with all their troubles and problems, as well as for help in the work of the ashram. We saw her generous care when families came seeking shelter in the ashram during the war, despite the added responsibilities and the significant change this would bring in the atmosphere of the ashram. All of this outer work that she did from early morning to night, and this attention she gave to the many disciples inside and outside the ashram, she did while continuing her inner work of uniting more and more integrally with the divine consciousness. Of course, the whole possibility of the supramental realization and its descent on earth, her primary mission, was made possible only because of her absolute and integral self-giving to the Lord, from the heights of her consciousness to the very cells of her body. She effected this descent of the supramental consciousness on earth because this was the will of the Lord, but it was at the same time for the deliverance of earth and humanity from ignorance and falsehood, and the establishment of a divine life that would be free of ignorance, suffering, and death. In other words, it was out of a fathomless divine love for the Lord and for his manifestation here on earth in a transformed humanity. Perhaps his absolute self-giving is expressed most eloquently and powerfully in her prayers and meditations, written primarily during the years 1912 to 1917, with a few written afterwards. Let's close with this prayer from January 23rd, 1917. Thou didst fill my being with so complete, so intense a love and beauty and joy that it seemed impossible to me that this would not be communicated. It was like a glowing hearth, whence the breath of thought wafted for far many sparks, which entering the secrecy of men's hearts, kindled other similar fires, fires of thy divine love, O Lord, that love which impels and draws human beings irresistibly to thee. O my sweet Lord, grant that this may not be only a vision of my enwrapped consciousness, but indeed a reality, effectively transforming all beings and things. Grant that this love, this beauty and joy which flood all my being, that is hardly strong enough to bear their intensity, may also flood the consciousness of all those I have seen, all those I have thought of, and all those also whom I have never thought of or seen. Grant that all may awake to the consciousness of thy infinite bliss. O my sweet Lord, fill their hearts with joy, love, and beauty. Thank you.